Before we get wrapping and going into this, any questions, any thoughts? We're really just kind of an open forum for you guys. He's a wealth of information, and I can kind of tap in there on occasion. So, any thoughts? Yep.
So, going back to your talk, I just had a question. You said something about, you're either a micromanager or you inspire. So, if everybody's one of those, inevitably you're going to have those people under you. What do you do with them? Like the micromanager, just cut them out, get them out, right? Cut them loose.
So that would be, in my opinion, that would be the quick and easy solution, but that's not going to help you develop yourself as a leader, and it's not going to help them develop themselves as a leader. One thing I need to do a better job of that I think, have you guys ever heard of Jocko, the Jocko podcast? He's big into talking about the why, like sitting down and explaining to people the impact of their actions. I wholeheartedly agree with him. And I neglect often to say that, in addition to setting the example, you need to explain to people why it is you're doing the things that you are doing and why you lead the way that you lead or why you're making a decision. So you need to do that. You need to explain the why to those people. You need to give them the opportunity. You need to help them along the way. And then at some point in time, if they cannot meet the standard that you have set, then at that point, I would cut them free. Find a job that would be better for them. But it's not, I wouldn't just be like, you're out of here.
No, right, of course. But personal experience, dealt with people where no matter what, it's just going back to that, like, what do you want me to do? Them asking me, right, or whoever. And,
it's, I've encountered that before. It's not the hardest lesson to teach,
Sure.
You have to constantly reinforce it.
Yeah,
Come to me with solutions, not with questions.
Coming up, JC.
So in a leadership role, going back to the micromanager thing, I'm sure you guys, when you were training people, you got a lot of people who were relatively completely green to what you were trying to teach them. At what point do you recognize that there's a certain aspect of teaching that's going to require you to almost micromanage them if they have absolutely no clue what they're doing, to the point where you can kind of cut that cord and release them? Is there like a recognition point for you for that? Because if somebody has no idea what they're doing, you have to tell them at least at the beginning what they should be, and they may be coming up to you and saying, what should I do?
Do you? I would switch micromanagement and what you just said with mentorship. So it's not us saying, this is what you need to do, this is how you need to do it. Hey, come with me. I'm going to show you how to do this. We're going to do this together. And set the example, set the work ethic, set the standard that you want to see in them with your actions, not sitting there. I've heard it said before, if you teach your kids how to tie their shoes, you're actually doing them a disservice because they need to struggle and they need to learn. But you're there to teach them, but you're not there how to teach them to do, necessarily how to tell them to do it. You're just there for support as they learn how to do it along the way, and you're going to make sure they're not going to tie their shoe around their neck and choke themselves to death. Even though I think that's an obscure possibility, it could happen, right? But there's a difference between tying your kid's shoes for them and teaching them how to tie their shoes. One is micromanaging, one is mentorship.
Or just buying them Velcro shoes.
That's the varsity play.
Slip-ons.
Yeah, slip-ons.
But if your kids wear Velcro shoes in high school, they're going to get their ass beat. So think it through.
I think they call those people hipsters. So I'm going to go. I've seen them around Austin. Yeah. As I was listening to Andy's talk, the idea of a micromanager, I always think if you have to micromanage somebody, you've obviously found the wrong position for them. I can think of the guys that have come and worked for me and me trying to force people into, we call it, a square peg round hole, where finding that. And I think for each person you have to find their aptitude. If you find the point that you have to micromanage somebody, then you either need to look at yourself and say, okay, I need to look at how I'm leading them, or more importantly, I need to find a person and I need to look for their aptitude. It's if I would depend, and I'm going to make fun of Tex a little bit, but I have to depend on Tex for tech support and helping me do a technical job. He's probably not my guy, but in terms of having a high level conversation on physiology and movement, he's the guy I'm going to call first. So I think being able to accurately assess people and understand what they can and can't do and what their limitations are, and then being able to play to their strong suits, figuring out how you motivate each person. I know for, in Andy's job, and especially in mine, I didn't get to throw the ball. That was the quarterback's job, and as much as I wanted to throw the ball, I can't throw the ball because it looks terrible. I don't have enough range of motion. And but that wasn't the job I got to do. So I had to play my position and be the master of my job. And I think for a lot of people where they start micromanaging, just a good conversation is this something you can do? Is this something you want to do? Is something you're able to do? And then being able to take a step back. Because I think a lot of times people just aren't realistic with what they can do. And then being able to, more importantly, because I think you're going to drive yourself nuts. I hate micromanaging. I hate having to chase people around. So it's easier to just find people that are good at what they can and then stand back and let them make playmakers. Okay.
Anything else?
Don't be shy.
Please.
So I'll jump in then. So understanding and accepting your position, let's say under a leader or mentorship role, it's kind of incumbent upon the mentee or the follower or whatever to understand how to be led, right? And I guess maybe that's going down into what McKercher was saying as well. But Andy, this kind of ties back to some of the stuff we talked about last night and kind of grooming people to understand or find motivation, right? Or accountability through potentially failure or hardship. I guess where does that fall into the leadership paradigm? Is it your role? Is that a segment that you need to focus on in terms of developing your personnel and having them be receptive to taking those risks, right? Because I think you have personnel come up and say, "Hey, what should I do?" They're afraid to fail, right?
Does anybody other than Luke want to ask a question? Because I don't know where he's going. He's using words he doesn't understand.
You tried that last
night. There's
like
8 questions. Somebody please raise your hand.
If the moon was made of cheese. I'm sorry.
How do you deal with burnout? Like employees I guess the military, I'm not sure if you have enlisted men getting burned out of their job. But people that just maybe don't want to achieve anymore, they come in really hot and then they fizzle out real quick. Because maybe they wasn't in a position to move up, maybe they have the ability to move up. But how do you kind of maybe remotivate them before they can leave you and go work for someone else? Or how do you remotivate them and say, hey, here's what to do a little bit longer?
You sit down and explain to them or talk to them. Like, hey, what's going on? I mean, as a leader, right, you should have the ability, if you have people working for you, to sit back and you're going to get a better perspective of how they are in the grander scheme of things. They're probably front sight focus, looking at what's 2 inches in front of their face, and maybe they're just tired of hitting their head against the door that they can't see past. So communicating and be able, getting to know the people that work for you. It's a very tenuous balance I found in the teams between knowing your people too well and then not knowing them well enough. Because you don't want to get emotionally attached in a combat environment and make decisions emotionally. You need to make them objectively. And it's very difficult, I find, to do both of those at the same time. But if you see somebody who's burning out, the first step is like, hey, man, what's going on? Because the burnout might be a manifestation of a problem going on at home. It could be a financial, you never know until you sit down and have the conversation. Pull that person along. If you see somebody in a low point, again, pull them along, inspire them, sit down, show them the path ahead of them, empower them to have the tools to get to that path. And if they've determined that they don't want to be on the path anymore, help them find the path that they want to be on. To answer how do I deal with burnout, when I have ever burned out in my life, I go and I look for people who are smarter, more capable, better than myself, not hard to find because just about everybody fits that bill, and I go and I talk to them. And I draft off of other people's expertise and experience in their station in life, and it's been incredibly powerful and impactful on my life. And when you go to that person who is, they may not even see the door they're smashing their face again. That's what I've encountered most often. They don't even know what's going on. They're just burned out. Having that conversation is the beginning of the recalibration of that compass. And maybe that compass isn't going to work for you anymore, but you can find them help somewhere else.
So I asked that question because I'm actually in that position right now. I'm pretty burnt out with what I'm doing. And
what are you doing?
I work at Orange Theory Fitness, and it's God damn it, it's all about cheerleading at its finest. It's fantastic. I liked it. I came in hot, worked out really well for the first 10 months. The money was fantastic, and now I'm realizing, hey, there's a little bit more I want to grow. I'm not saying I have to go into say a head trainer position or work more on the business side, but I was like, there's a lot of things out there. Some people that hate doing like TV marketing, all that kind of stuff. Like the person doing it now, hates doing it. She hates getting up in front of the TV, hates doing the news interviews or whatever kind of hot spot they want. And I'm like, hey, I don't mind doing that. I'm pretty good, pretty witty, and I like talking to people and whatnot. But They never see anything that I have to offer other than, hey, you're coaching. But the problem I have, though, is also I know what it is my manager, I guess my boss, her superior, micromanages like crazy. And so one of the things I thought about was, like, why would I want to get a promotion to go work for her when most of the people are actually stepping down so they don't have to work for her anymore, right? And so that's kind of my position now, is thinking, how do I maybe approach them to say, hey, like, this is why I'm not interested in working in this position unless something changes, because I feel like that talk's coming pretty soon. I know that there have been talk to me before about, like, hey, we want to kind of give you a promotion, this, that, and the other, but I'm like, I don't know if I want that right now. So I guess my question next is working backwards here. How do I possibly approach them and say, hey, like, I'm not a fan of your leadership, I'm not a fan of how this is going. How would
Probably
you
not
handle
like that.
conversation? Yeah. Hey, you kind of suck.
I don't know. Kind of know where that's headed.
Hey, I just want you to know that you suck. Can I have your job?
This past weekend I learned.
So I have worked for some terrible bosses.
Yeah.
And you're all going to work for terrible bosses. You might be a terrible boss right now.
Right, yeah. Yeah.
It's thought provoker. I work even harder to be the example of what I want to see from my boss when I'm working for a terrible boss. And I shove it down their face very quietly with the actions that I take. Because it makes me feel better because I'm an asshole. Now, that's a different part of the story, but that's the route that you need to take. Because if you fall to that level and you're like, hey, I'm not a fan of your leadership, all you're displaying is bad leadership.
Right.
You have the choice. Take the power away from the person. And in the military, you know, like I said, the only difference and reason people pay attention is because of the compressed timeline. And I had the mechanism, and there always is the mechanism, that if regardless the tact you take is not effective with your boss, that person has a boss. And if it's where I would caution you, if it's just financial based or a position based from you, I would caution you of bypassing that individual. I did that a few times, and I fired my boss one time in a firefight in Afghanistan and told him to go sit in the corner, essentially. I did that not for me, but I did that for the people that I was working for, and it needed to be done. And I had the mechanism to back that up. But there was no financial gain in that, and there was no gain really for me in that whatsoever. I was just trying to get the people out alive. So you got to understand the difference between those two. I would look really long and hard about what you want to accomplish in that job, and you need to play chess, not checkers. Go into your boss and say, hey, I don't like how you do your job. That's checkers. Figuring out a package to present yourself in the manner that you need to over time, if you need to get to the position you want, that's chess. So I would start, though, with, is this the job that you want to have? Are you fulfilled at the end of the day? You're surrounded by orange walls at all time. I'm sure you're super happy.
I actually go to bed at night and everything's still orange. It's kind of crazy. Like, my eyes don't change anymore. No, to be honest, like, it's not what I want to do. And that's kind of what I've learned, too, is, like, it's not, it's great. You're helping a lot of people out. You make a lot of people really happy, right? But at the end of the day, it's not coaching. It's not this. This is what I do love to do. But also after working in the industry for 6 years, I also kind of think now, I was like, I don't really want to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning anymore, especially if I had a family, kids, and what else does it lead to? So I'm also looking at other career options. But I guess in the grand scheme of things, though, like, get back to the point is, what do I want to do is kind of just grow a career, have a career, and what that means is, I don't know, I like to lead, I like to be in charge of people. So I kind of lead by example. And making money is nice and all, but I think having just being able to lead and be able to accomplish something, but look back at my life and write a book, I think that's kind of the way I look at it. It's like I look at my grandfather, what he did, and he's been through so much, and his story is out the wazoo. How do I create my own story, and where do I go from there? And
all I can say is don't force it. Use the job that you have to create the space so you can go look laterally for something that it is you would want to do, and then don't write a book.
Yeah,
just don't.
Don't write a book.
Live your life like you would, and then just don't. All right, because you'll be forced to lie in the book like they do in all the SEAL books. It just suck.
Cool.
That was actually really nice. I was expecting something a little
I had
different.
other colorful words, but I restrained myself.
Oh, my God. Andy might be one of the more brutal life coaches I've ever done. That was the exercising restraint was pretty good on that one.
Yeah.
So you spent a lot of time in the teams, obviously, John, with football. How did you guys, once you got out of that was a big part of your identity, how did you reestablish yourselves and, that was a big part of your life and kind of move on from that, but kind of restart again? What was kind of your takeaways or things that helped you through that?
You want to go first?
Yeah, I always It's kind of interesting. I kind of made this choice a long time ago. I really hated how the majority of ex-players do something that parasites off of the game, and they can never go away and redefine themselves. You look at guys, very lucrative jobs announcing, sitting there still treading on the fact that they played the game, 30, 40 years later. And, that's great. That's what they want to do. They want to get up on a, Sunday morning and talk football and this and that. And for me, I just wanted to go do something new. I wanted to reinvent myself. I wanted to have a second career where I start and go in a completely different direction that doesn't just allow me to, just parasite off of what I did for, the 10 years from the time I was 23 to 32 years old. And I looked at it and said, geez, I got to live hopefully another 40, 50 years of my life. My dad's 80. So what I did for 10 years in my 20s and early 30s is going to, set the trajectory. And that's who I am for the rest of my life. At 6 years old, I still got to get up every Sunday morning and do, CBS Chalk Talk and talk about the fact that, the Patriots are going to play the Eagles. And I was like, fuck. And I know people dig that shit and people live and breathe with the NFL in this, but fucking enough, right? Go out, fucking go work at Orange Theory, fucking then blow your brains out. Write a book.
Theory.
But that's the thing. And Andy and I did his podcast, and he asked me, what I wanted in life, and that I wanted this idea of being like a Renaissance man. I was. I took this poetry class, and I was always impressed that some of the poets that I was attracted to were like warriors. They were kings. They were these vicious warriors on the field, but yet they wrote poetry. And I always thought that was a cool kind of dichotomy of who they were. And I just wanted something like that. I wanted to be able to reinvent myself. I didn't want somebody to be like, oh, there's just another NFL player who does something. I wanted to be able to redefine my life, and that was a constant choice for me. I just didn't think it would be this. I told the story. I was, thinking about going to law school, and that's what I was planning on doing. I was going to go back and be an attorney. My brother was like, my practice is booming. I need help. 3 years, we're going to go out and, basically, defend criminals, scumbags, and murderers. We're in. Let's do it. And my brother's a big-time defense attorney in Orange County. He was a DA. He's like, you're going to intern at the DA, and had it all set up. And then I was like, I think I want to do this strength conditioning kind of fitness thing. And he's like, no. You're ruining our plan. And that's how it started. And it really was born out of the idea that there was just so much nonsense. I remember sitting there listening to people talking about training that had no idea about being able to attain a goal, and not just a goal for a week or 6 weeks or 12 weeks, but I'm talking a decade, an entire lifetime, a body of work. And I wanted to be able to bring that narrative where it's this is what you do step one. And when you get to that point, this is your next, and this is how you progress. So you can effectively, build athleticism, unlock athletic potential. A lot of stuff we talk here about Power Athlete. This was what was, rummaging around in my brain, and I felt like I wanted to share it with people. And I was even more amazed when people wanted to know this. I remember said to Andy, I'm like, you think normal people want to know this shit? And he's like, I think so. And that was kind of what was born. And then we got a huge response with the original stuff we did. And all those emails, talk to me, Johnny, it really allowed me to understand the technology, and just more and more speaking and understanding has just kind of evolved it. So I just didn't want my NFL career to be the defining moment of my life, where now I look back at 50 years old and I'm like, wow, I was really cool 20 years ago. And now what do I do? I would love to be able to continue to do great things through my entire life where, that's the adjunct, that's the asterisk. Oh, and that dude played 10 years in the NFL. And that was what was burning. And I always hated the idea that, 80% of NFL players are broke after 2 years. And I was like, shit, that's not good statistics. And why? Because, you think about, most guys go to college to really, as just a feeder system to go play in the NFL. A lot of guys don't get degrees. I got my degrees. And I knew what I wanted to do, and I had a trajectory before I went to go do it, and I was going to pick it up and run with it. And I was really was pissed off the thought that they were like, oh, you'll, when you're playing in the NFL, and actually a GM told me this, they said to me, if you don't play here, you're on the street, you won't make this money next year. And I was like, okay, challenge accepted. And I'm going to bust my fucking ass to try to prove that fucking asshole wrong, and sorry my language. But that, I think it was Ozzie Smith. So he was the GM for the Baltimore Ravens, told me that. And I was like, no problem. I'm, fairly educated, white middle-class kid from Palos Verdes who went to Berkeley and, didn't have 7 Lamborghinis in the parking lot. So we'll see what happens. And that's what I wanted. So I just think, like, and Andy kind of the same way, like, what more epic things can I do? I remember when he called me, he's like, I'm going to do this wingsuit thing. And I'm like, let's do it. Like, what do you need from me? And for me, and I'm sure for him, a lot of times being in the SEALs, he can speak for himself, but like guys will write books and he still makes jokes about it. And this is all they ever did. I was a SEAL and now here I am 30 years later and I got to show up to this, breakfast club that they're going to pay me $50 and let me drink unlimited margaritas and tell war stories. And that's what he did. And I think for me, that's a wasted life. I think that you have to constantly look to progress and constantly put your stamp on your mark. What's this piece? What's this piece? And that was what I wanted. So,
Like what he said, but just switch the part out with the military. I mean, he nailed it. The guys I see struggle the most are the ones who didn't spend. They attach too much of who they are, and they derive their sense of being and self-worth from what they did instead of focusing on who they are. So I have no idea the course my life has taken. I think the best thing for me of my military career was to finish it and move on. And I would love to get to a point where at some time people would be like, oh, wow, that guy was in the military. Like, it was cool. I'm proud of it, but I don't want it to be the only, thing on my tombstone.
I remember one of my guys I played with, I remember as he retired, he told me that the saddest thing for him was he didn't hear the roar of the crowd anymore. And he's like, do you miss the roar of the crowd? I'm like, I never heard the crowd. Every single time I stepped on the field, every single play, everything was deathly silent. And I just remember seeing movement. I couldn't tell you, like, remember they were like, oh, that crowd noise. I'm like, I never heard it. I literally just remember seeing people move, and it was like a completely silent environment for me. I remember running. I don't know if I don't know if anybody ever remembers, but when I came out of the tunnel, when they would announce, I would run as fast as I could, literally. Like most guys, Ray Lewis is out there like dancing for 45 minutes, and I'd be like, this is ridiculous. And I would literally run as fast as I could out of the tunnel and get out there. And people are like, why do you run so fast? I'm like, did you ever see Mike Tyson when he came out of the tunnel? He didn't even have there was no entourage, nothing. He would sprint out there and whoop somebody's ass. I'm like, run as fast as you can to the fight. Don't delay it. Don't Ray Lewis this thing. Nobody wants to see that. Show up, do your job, and then walk off the field and go home. And to me, like, I wanted to run as fast as I could into that fist fight, and that's what I wanted to do. And when it was over, I ran as fast as I could to go do something else. And I always remember one of my coolest NFL stories was we were playing at the end of the year, last game of the year, we were playing down in Washington, D.C. We were playing the Redskins. And fourth quarter, we did like a little rollout, and I peeled around, and I ended up catching Bruce Smith in his ear hole and knocked him like ass over tea kettle straight on his face. And all of a sudden, Donovan, Donovan McNabb, he throws the ball on the ground all the time. Just easy throw, third down, punt. So I literally watch Bruce as I'm like kind of get up. I kind of laugh a little bit, and I'm like, got you, old man. And pop off, and I'm kind of like backpedaling. He's not moving. And, the punt team's coming out, and I'm standing there, and I kind of get to the sideline. I'm like, fuck, Bruce is still laying there, and this play's going on. And I watched him pull himself up and walk off the field, and he went out the tunnel. And I never saw him again. He wasn't after the game, nothing. And so like a year later, I'm down at the Super Bowl, and I like look at this like at the bar, and I see this dude go like this. And it's Bruce Smith, and I'm like, oh, shit. He's fucking going to come. He found me. He's going to come whoop my ass. So he's like, I see him walk, and he's like making eye contact with me, and he comes up next to the bar, and I'm like, hey, Mr. Smith. And he's like, I played 17 years. Or was 18, I forgot. But he was like, man, I played many years. And he goes, the last play of my NFL career, you knocked me unconscious. And I was like waiting, he's going to like hit me. We're going to get in this fight. And he's like, I came up and I actually walked off the field, took off my pads, put my clothes on, got in the car, and never went back. And that was the end of my career. And I was like, wow. He's like, 2 drinks. And we proceeded. I didn't even ask what we were drinking. He poured it, and we had a bunch of drinks. And I was like, can you tell that story of your Hall of Fame induction? And he kind of like looked at me and didn't say a word. I'm like, I guess that was a no. And no, but like, and what was nice is he told me, he's like, you played the game like you should have. You played hard. I always knew what I was going to get out of you. The scouting report always talked about you. And he goes, you played the game like you should, and you'll always be proud of that. He goes, but you're never going to go to the Hall of Fame. I was like, I know. but I still knocked your ass out. And that was probably one of the coolest moments of my NFL career. And I look back and I have these moments, like I have things that happen to me like that nobody can take from me, and nobody will ever hear. I mean, other than you guys. But like, there'll be no sports cast. There'll be no behind the music or 30 for 30, like nothing. And like, that's the story. That's the reason I did this job. Like for no other reason. I didn't do it for this. I didn't do it for the money. I mean, the money was fine. Don't get me wrong, but I didn't do it for any other reason. I think if you have to get up and drag your ass out of bed for a paycheck like Orange Theory over here, it fucking gets awful, right? It gets terrible. Right? But to go out and do the job and be proud and be able to put your stamp on it and then get to walk away, or hopefully hobble away in many cases. But I think Andy obviously had a way cooler job, but actually the cooler the job, the less the pay. So his job was cooler, but the pay scale wasn't the same. So I constantly remind him of that. But that same thing, like the stories that he has, I mean, and he'll never tell them to you. Like, has the coolest stories on the planet that nobody will ever hear, other than the fact that over the years I've heard him and been like, dude, I feel like a little kid, like, Daddy, Andy, tell me the story this time. And he'll be like, okay, shut the fuck up. Okay, I'll tell you one more time. I'm like, that's the best one. And he'll never tell him. Like, the story for this flag is pretty epic. And, so maybe you can corner him in private and hear about it. So what else? Yeah.
How do you create buy-in? So when I think about leaders that I want to be around or teams that I want to be on, everyone's bought in, whether it be football, military, business. Like, those people are just 100% giving everything they've got to be a part of that team. As a leader, how do you create that?
I think some of what you're talking about is like people's natural desire or affinity to go down a certain road. And I think if you have to artificially create it, you're probably setting yourself up for a long-term failure. But as far as buy-in, I mean, like when I think of buy-in, I think of asking people to do stuff that is outside of the norm. And it starts with, again, it goes back to explaining to them why you're asking them to do that, or explain what the values are that the team that you're talking about or the environment that you're talking about, and giving them the opportunity to buy in and not forcing it. You know what I mean? Just whatever you do, just don't make it contrived. It really, a lot of it comes down to explaining the why you are the way you are, what the ethos for your organization or team may be, why it is like that, the impact that has, and let the individual choose on their own. But just don't try to create it artificially.
I think people like success. I mean, I'm sure this is kind of a funny question. You guys obviously know Bill Belichick. And have you ever thought to yourself, man, I would love to play for Bill Belichick? Yeah, and he's fucking callous, like zero emotion, like to go out and do it because it's all business. There's no bullshit. I mean, I played for Dick Vermeil, who used to cry almost every single day, which is at first, like I came from the Eagles where we won all these games. Andy Reid, real matter of fact, and I went to Kansas City and I got Dick Vermeil, who's crying in meetings. And super emotional dude, and people were bought into that, but I was uncomfortable. I was like, is this dude really crying? I'm like looking around and I'm like, and we won a lot of games in Philly, and then I go to, Kansas City's pretty good and, big rushing team and just needed better defense. And I think the teams where like people are winning and it's good, like it's easy to buy in on that shit. It's fucking hard to buy in when you're, 3-13 and you're playing in, Cincinnati or something or Cleveland. Oh my God. Like that's hard. And you know what? Like to ask guys to buy in and sell out in those type of environments is tough. So, I mean, I think for, like when you think about like, big buy-in and people are on the ball and everybody's running 100 miles an hour, it's usually success. People can see a bigger picture and like, they know where they're going and they're making moves and things are snowballing and people get excited and they want to be a part of something great. And I think if you can create that environment, you can take a fun, successful environment and make it so that everybody feels like they're part of the team and moving towards a goal. I think that's important. When you feel that you're just this like useless cog getting smashed in the face every day, it's tough to get up.
So as a leader, coach, mentor, the variety of hats we all wear, at what point is it your responsibility to realize that maybe you need to fire a client or fire that maybe you're not the coach for them and the best thing you can do is help them move on to something else?
I would say when you realize you arrive at that point.
But then I guess, I think that's a hard move for people to make, with deciding to, instead of continually fighting themselves to be that thing for that person, realize that someone else would do it better.
Yeah, I think realizing that you might not be the right fit for somebody and helping somebody find somebody else, and especially in an environment that's financially driven, it's a sign, I think, that to me is a bigger sign of strength than trying to fight your way through the problem. I mean, like, as far as the question is phrased, I mean, you're going to have to determine how much time do you have to dedicate to them? I mean, I've fired clients. I know John's fired clients, and it's how soon you can recognize that regardless of what you do, it's not going to work. I think the most dangerous thing you can have is where you want more than somebody else.
Oh, God. Isn't that crazy where all of a sudden you want, that's how I knew I couldn't own a gym anymore. I remember when I went in there and I was so excited for somebody, and we just don't care. I'm like, the day that I realized that I wanted it more than they did, I was like, I shouldn't. And I think Callie and Luke asked me to never come back to the gym. They were like, why don't you just stay at home and not come anymore? I'm like, okay, I'll get a gym membership somewhere else. And I did. I would go lift weights at Metrics, which was down the street. And it was because, when you get into a situation where people are like, I just don't really care. And you're like, well, why are you here? I just wouldn't want to go through life not caring about something. And it's, and also firing people's tough. Luke's first day, I made him fire somebody. That's how I knew he was my guy. I'm like, hey, Luke, go fire that person. He didn't even know him.
No problem.
It was way easy. But that's the thing. When you don't know somebody, it's easy to fire them.
That's true.
But when you actually have history and you know people and their family and their kids and the interaction, you know their situation, then it becomes kind of personal. Whereas, that's why Andy's so good at it. He's a heartless bastard. So,
got to play to your strengths. No, firing people sucks. I've agonized over every time I had to fire anybody, to include the guy that I fired in the middle of a firefight. I constantly was there more that I could have done? Could I give him another opportunity? It weighs very heavily because it's important.
I'm curious about a belief over the course of your careers that you've changed your mind about, what you thought was a principle that you've left behind.
To be honest with you, I don't think I've shed any of them away. I think I was very fortunate of coming from a community that had shed all of the BS before I got there. I was the recipient of a selection course in a community that kind of had their stuff figured out along the way. And a lot of it I already knew from my family and the upbringing that I had. I mean, they set my moral compass for me. I think the SEAL teams calibrated it a little bit more. But I mean, honestly, from the teams, I can't think of a single one that I've been like, you know what, in hindsight, that's not correct. I wish I would have done things a little bit differently, but as far as the framework that was laid out for me, it was pretty damn good.
The one thing I would change was realizing that tomorrow exists. So when I played, I had this thought that today is the most important day, so I have to be able to play. So I took a helmet in the shin, and they cast me for broke my fibula clean in half 5 days, and I played a couple weeks later. And I remember thinking them coming in and being like, we need you to play. And I'm like, well, my leg's broken, I can't walk. And they were like, well, that's okay. You can just punch your hands, right? The guy behind you is worse than you. And I'm like, so the dude that you're paying behind me is worse than me and than with me with a broken leg? And they were like, yes. And me being like, well, that sucks for that dude. And he was, and then I went out and I played. And should I have done that? No. I mean, I got scoped on a Monday and played on a Sunday because they said, hey, we need you. And I think not having the foresight, and then also, there's kind of this Iron Man kind of toughness. If you guys follow Mark Schlereth, Snake is had 50 surgeries, and he got to the point where what's another one? And it's hurting him. And so I think seeing the bigger picture and not just being so one-to-one. I think seeing a bigger goal, because for me, I never thought I was going to play as long as I did. The average is 3 years. I didn't really know anybody that had ever played. I didn't really, they tell you that number. And actually, Andy asked me about the 3 years in the NFL, and I'm like, well, it's a totally messed up number because you have guys like Peyton Manning and Tony Gonzalez, and these guys that play for 15, 16, 17, 18 years. And you're like, for all of those guys, what about the dude that just showed up and had cracked his Gatorade and they canned him? And that's how it either works. It's a job that either you can do or you can't do. And it's not black. I mean, it's pretty black and white. Like, guys will come in and literally day one as a rookie, like this guy's going to play for a long time if he stays healthy. So I think assessing that sooner and then being able to not be seeing the bigger picture and not being so one-to-one. I don't necessarily know if I went back in time, if I would change, because that was how I looked at it. Like, you know what, like we're going to burn it down today, and then you know what, I'm going to worry about tomorrow. And I think like that was good for me. But in hindsight, at 40, like me thinking back, if I could go back and tell the younger version, like, don't run down the hill. Let's walk down the hill. So you guys know that joke from Colors. So
I would agree with that. And when I said I would change how some of the things I did, it would be focused a little bit more on the future. But as far as towards your question, the framework or like what the principles that were imparted on me, I would keep the principles the same. The application would be slightly different.
Like I definitely wouldn't go back and be a vegan. Right? Like, I mean, like the major principles, I would still lift weights. I thought the hammer strength stuff was awful we did, but I was right. So I probably wouldn't have used knee wraps when I was 13 years old. I think that was a big one. I probably wouldn't have used a belt until I was in my 20s. So I think like knee wraps and belts when you're 14 years old is an awful thing, and I did that. I remember being like, how do I get in that super suit over there? You're 15, you squat 225. Don't worry about that. Like that, like being, and I think big part for my program is me literally telling people this. I'm like, don't just follow this progression. You'll be fine. How do you know? Because I did everything wrong. And I tell that to my dad all the time. I'm like, Dad, I did all this stuff wrong. He's like, you still got to play 10 years in the NFL. I'm like, I know, but what if I did it all right? Then where I've been? He's like, probably 9 years in the NFL. So he's pretty good on that stuff. So.
Just want to talk a little bit about innovation. You talked about it in your talk there, and I'm thinking about how it applies to business as well as coaching. And when you're a coach and a business owner, I feel like sometimes those things can be conflicting at times, or at least the temptation to be conflicting because you're trying to make more money. What are your thoughts on being able to balance the bullshit in order to make an extra buck versus like innovating and incorporating things that seem to be profitable and trending in our industry?
Well, I wouldn't. When I say innovation, I'm not talking about like broad jumping into the Grand Canyon. It can be 1% at a time. Another way to say it would be don't get tied to the way that things are done and constantly analyze and assess is the way that we're doing this now still the best way? The way we cleared buildings in 2005 is different than the way we cleared buildings in 2007, and it changed again in probably 2010. Because we could still do it the other way, but we were finding improvement in our safety and our lethality by doing it other ways. We didn't scrap everything else. We would just change percentage point at a time by looking at what we would have in action and we would gauge the reaction. So innovation inside of the industry, strength and conditioning industry, if you want to try new stuff, which I think you should, and to throw a random ass number out, I would say 10% of what you do, I would be experimenting with other stuff just to see what works. And if it doesn't work, get rid of it, move on to the next thing. Just leave that space available and never find yourself in the place where it's like, yes, this is the way to do it. Because to me, that's the fastest way to put yourself on the Titanic. It's just that slow, incremental, and objective reflection as to the results that you're getting and the methods that you're using to get them. Does that answer your question at all? I don't believe in money. Bitcoin's the way to go. So,
Andy's actually been
flat earth.
mining cryptocurrencies on his spare time. So,
I've made some bad decisions in my life. One in particular, when it came to money, after I got out of the military, and I will never do that again. You'll get the money.
Was it a Lamborghini?
I wish I didn't have that much money, but goddamn right, that'd have been the first purchase. Don't chase money. I'm dead serious. If you think that being wealthy has to do with what's in your bank account, like for me, I was talking with John earlier today, it's about being able to drive the car I want to drive, and when I go to a restaurant with my family, I can order what I want to order. You'll never get to, like, if you want to be a millionaire and you get there, I guarantee you 5 million is going to be looking better than 1 and 10 more than that. I know some very wealthy people, like into the B's of net worth, I have billions of dollars. The people that earn that money are happy and fulfilled. The next generation are some of the most fucked up people I've ever encountered in my entire life. They have everything, they need for nothing, they want for nothing, and they're unhappy. I've seen enough of it now that I'm less concerned With chasing money, I would just chase results and let the money come in that direction. Don't make it completely financially based.
Got one over here.
So we've talked a lot about leadership and teams and things like that. What are some hard stops for you guys to recognize somebody that you would either not pick for your team, or maybe they slipped one past you, got on your team, and you don't want them to be part of your team anymore? Like where do you really draw a firm line on, behavior traits, things along those lines that you would see in a bad teammate?
Stealing is our number one thing. You can ask our company policy. Don't steal. Tell the truth. Even if it hurts, tell the truth, because I work really good with truth. It's when I get lied to or like theft or that shit. Like I can't deal with dishonest people. Like I can deal with somebody who might not know their job. They might have fucked up, or they might not be able to do it as well as they can. And you might take some shit about it, but at the end of the day, like as long as you are an honest, good person, like I can work with that. Like I can teach skills, I can mentor, we can do all these things. Like if the egg is sound, I'm good. It's when it's fucking cracked up, or you have nefarious shit, or lying and cheating and this, and just like a lot of like layers of just like darkness. And to me, I don't want to do that. I saw that too much in the NFL. I just saw so much. We were on the podcast, and Andy asked me, like kind of what my motto for it is, and I got it on my Instagram. It's like, be a simple man. I told him a story about, I went to Daytona Bike Week with my good friend Teddy, and we were riding up, and we stopped at this little bar called Peggy's Place, and there was on the marquee it said Van Zant Band, and we went in, and it was Lynyrd Skynyrd playing a warm-up show. They were going to play on the beach in Daytona, so I got to hear Lynyrd Skynyrd with like 10 drunk bikers on picnic tables drinking beer. And they played Simple Man, and like those lyrics were the first time I actually heard them and thought, you know what, this is way, way, way more, more me than anything else. And I think what people do is they create these layers, and it just adds complexity and stops them from what they want to accomplish. So I just look for more simple, and these guys know this about me, like less layers, more simple. Honesty is way easier to deal with. Like I can have that in my company. It's when things get dark and nefarious that I'm like, ugh, like I can't deal with that. So
I would add ego and hubris to that, but like lying, cheating, stealing, and all those things John said, and then ego and hubris would be the last two.
It's Andy's similar to like my brothers, for example, where if I don't talk to him for 3 or 4 months and we get on the phone, I'm around him, he's actually the exact same person. Like there's no change. Like, oh, everything's different. Like I get nervous too when I talk to people, other than Tom Incledon is the only person that I won't talk to for maybe a week, and then he calls and tells me that everything's changed. Everything he knew last week is wrong, and he's going to but that's Tom, and that's how I've known him for 20 years. And you guys will get to hear Dr. Tom get up here. But for me, like, consistency, that like kind of hard work, just kind of simple. Like I like that. To me, that's easy to see. Like I can see through that, and I know what I'm getting instead of having to manage a bunch of other stuff. And ego has killed more people than cancer. I mean, I think my dad told me that. He's like, ego gets you in trouble a lot. You got to be very sharp with it. And I can think some of my biggest mistakes in this world were because my ego got too big. Somebody told me something, and I thought my value was greater than it was, and it ended up kicking me in the ass. And at the end of the day, like, those things are good because they humble you and allow you to kind of retrace, and then all of a sudden you hopefully learn from it, or you don't, and you keep making the same mistakes over again. I'm sure you guys run into people where you're like, God, every time I talk to that person, he keeps making the same mistake. And not everybody's meant to learn everything. And, my mom always says there's old souls and young souls. And she's like, I think that person's just a young soul. And I don't know, but it's just an interesting way that to put that. So. Oh, thanks. You mean this wallet? Do you know what this wallet says? Someone says bad motherfucker on it. Literally.
In your speech, you said be cautious, wanting more for people than they want for themselves. And then talking about firing people, you said if you want more for them, like, what do you do other than firing them if that's not an option? Or you don't want that to be your only option, what do you do in that situation?
So a situation where, I'm just trying to make sense of the question here. So you're working with an individual, you don't want to fire them, but they're not performing, and you want to have other options. Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
I would sit them down. Again, I'm going to be a broken record to a degree.
Is this the come to Jesus moment? The come to Jesus talk.
I don't know. It might be, I suppose.
That's what we usually call it, the come to Jesus moment, where you sit down and.
Well, he's not talking to you, so shut up. So I would sit down and talk to the person, explain the path that you're trying to put them on, put the tools in place, do not do it for them, and they either perform or they don't. And then you can make your decision whether or not to fire them based off of that. It's educated not only on your side, but on their side, and it's much more objective that way. But basically what I'm saying, don't want more for somebody than they want for themselves. Don't do it for them. You don't get anything out of that. So give them the tools, give them the room to maneuver, and if they fall flat on their face, then it's up to you as a leader. Do you want to invest more time into it? Do you work in an environment where you can invest more time? Is there a difference that you could make, or do you need to cut your losses and move on?
Got one over here.
This is for both. Now, in a military situation, I would assume that having a lack of ego can sometimes be a strength, right? Because you're putting the team or the operation above personal glory, right? For an athlete, I think I've worked with a few athletes that I knew could give more, but they didn't have the belief system. So how do you, as someone in a military situation, take something that is a strength, but also build upon that so that they do have the ego when the time is right? And then John, as an athlete, when you've got a guy that has the skills, has the talent, but doesn't necessarily believe in it themselves, or doesn't necessarily think they can get to the next level, how do you guys work with those two parameters?
I don't think ego has anything to do with any of that.
Yeah, I always thought, ego was dangerous, but pride was a good thing. Yeah, like confidence or pride in who you are. I've told the story that I went out there and my name was on my back, so it wasn't like I was getting away. So if there was a penalty or anything, they always said, put the camera on you, and it's like Welbourn. And I remember thinking, that's my dad's name, my mom's name, and my brother's and, my kid's name. So, that pride of who I was to be able to go out and do the job and be proud of the work that I've done. Whereas ego, I think, is, something that's more fragile that you're protecting. I think for athletes, you guys get to see it because of social media or whatnot, where you think what are these dudes thinking? You're like, are these guys out of their minds? Terrell Owens or some of that stuff where he was going to the thing in Philly. I'm just thinking this is awful. I don't like to see, people love in this country to see the train wreck. They want to see it wreck. They want to see the bodies. They want to see the worst. For me, I feel awful for them. I feel awful that they put themselves in that situation. I just always like the Bill Belichick where it's we went out and did the best job we could. Next question. That type of stuff. And, and there's a reason that Tom Brady is, probably the best player ever. Do you ever see any drama? Hopefully not. But to be able to go out, to me, I think ego's dangerous. I think you got to have pride in who you are, where you came from, and never get too far from those counterpoints.
Do you feel like some of that confidence, the Terrell Owens, that type personality, Chad Johnson, it seems like it's all receivers, right? But
I don't think that's confidence.
Well, that's what I was saying. It's rooted in insecurity because John and I...
No, that's ego. That's not, it's the different things.
Okay.
I agree. I don't think there's any positive to an overinflated ego whatsoever. I think every aspect of humanity would be better if it's kept in check at all times.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep.
Got about time for uno más.
Uno más, make it good.
Sean, go.
All right, we're going to stick on the topic of leadership. All right, it's kind of topic of the day. As a leader of a team, there's a couple big things you talked about. Talk about playing to strengths, creating an environment for success, and a lot of leadership is success driven. Another part of leadership is going to be mentorship, and what that kind of entails is forcing people to be put in positions where they're not successful. And as a leader, how do you balance that as far as building on people's weaknesses while still playing to their strengths to make the strongest team?
All right. Get your note papers out. We got 40 minutes here. No, first off, he's cheating. He's in the military, and I know him, so he's asking a canned question. We trained leadership. We talked about the importance of leadership in the SEAL teams. One of the first things you learn is that the absence of leadership, you're expected to step up and take charge. So those words are great. But they don't mean anything unless you teach people how to do that, unless you think in those ways. It's really easy to overwhelm a brand new leader. It's not hard to take people to failure. I just got to overwhelm them. And if you have no experience, how complicated is an NFL playbook? voluminous, right?
It's like one page.
Okay, never mind. In the documentary I saw, Any Given Sunday, it was very thick. So to continue on,
It was just like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you could take a dude from high school and just give him that book and say, "Hey, in 20 minutes we're going to test you on this," and you're going to fail. It's not hard to overwhelm people. So the point of taking people to failure, which is essential in training, you take them to failure in training along the pipeline to reinforce long-term effects of what happens. Bad leadership is an example. So what we used to do to reinforce to leaders that they need to prioritize and execute, prioritize the most information. I would go to the junior officers when I was working on the training side of the house, and we would get them into not necessarily a complex tactical problem, because it doesn't have to be complex when they're brand new, as you know, because they don't know anything and they have no experience to deal from. And I would just start asking them a bunch of questions. Hey, what's going on? Where's your people? What's the weather going to be like? What's your plan for this? What's your plan for that? And all I'm trying to do is to get them to listen to what I say instead of what's going on, to not prioritize information until it got to a point in training where I could stop training and be like, all right, stop. What just happened? Why did that just happen? You cannot allow that to happen because, okay, look around. Those two people have maneuvered and you just called an airstrike on the same building that they're in, right? Obviously, that's why you do this in training, not in real life, to try to reinforce those lessons. You stop them in that training environment, put them back into that environment again, and give them a little bit of time to percolate, and then you go back at it. But you don't give them a full fire hose, right? Mentorship is about incremental inspiration and pulling them along the way, not just grabbing that shepherd's hook and pulling them as hard as you can. So we would do that. Another great example of a way that we would teach our people to think proactively instead of reactively is a lot of the times we'd be walking around in the desert. So we'd practice walking in the desert, and you'd get shot at from one side or the other, and you end up doing this very choreographed, synchronized dance where one unit is firing, the other one is maneuvering.
Interpretive dance?
It can be interpretive, yes. Body language is important. So we would be maneuvering across, and if you're in those elements, I'm sure you guys have practiced this in the PJ pipeline, if you got more than 4 or 5 people, you're used to hearing one person's voice make the call. Hey, break left. You're used to hearing that voice. So what ends up happening in your people is if you haven't taught them to think 2 or 3 steps ahead in case something happens, if that voice goes away, bad things happen. So what we will do is we will take a training evolution up to a very critical and key point where they're used to hearing a voice, and you grab the person and you pull them out and you're like, hey, just shut up. I mean, watch what happens. And it completely falls apart. We stop it. Hey, this is what happens if you're relying on one person to always have the answers and you're blindly going into a situation instead of uptaking, processing, and prioritizing information on your own. We put them back into training. We'll hit them with it again the next day. It's not great, maybe 50% better. Maybe we won't stop the evolution that time, though. We'll let them grind their way through it. The 3rd time that we do it, it's way better. The 4th time we do it, it's way better. A couple weeks later, it doesn't matter who you pull out because every single person is thinking 1 or 2 or 3 steps along the way. So they have to experience or understand or flirt with failure. To me, I think it's important as a leader not only to fail yourself, but to allow your people to fail in that training environment. Find your boundaries in training before you find them in real life. And then recognize, though, and learn from that failure what caused it, what are the effects, secondary and tertiary effects, and then train towards not being able to make those mistakes again. But if you always shepherd those people in that mentorship and you don't let them fail, it's never going to really get reinforced. And from the environment that you guys work in and the environment that I came from, if you end up doing something that costs somebody their life, I mean, you have to wait. That's weighing on your shoulders for the rest of your life. But it's a slow, incremental process that is thoughtfully carried out, not just, oh, you failed. There's nothing to be gained from that. It's how you get to the failure that's important, not necessarily that you fail, even though I think you need to do both, but it's how you get there and what you learn from it. Whew, I just blacked out.
Wait.
I don't even remember what the question was.
Goddamn.
Wait.
Something about sandwiches.
So I have a super pointed question. If we can, I know we're winding it down, but I got the phone microphone, so I'm going to ask a question. So, Andy, is there an aspect to your leadership style, based on all of the topics, all the criteria we talked about, that you feel falls short, or that you're still working on, or something that you feel is, still something that you can aspire to?
Every single aspect. What would be the best way to
be more specific?
Yes, remember all the things that I talked about? The hubris, the ego, the integrity, the honesty, like all those things. It's, I got asked a question the other day if I'm ever around I was answering I meant to answer on the podcast and I didn't answer it. But the question was, how do you deal with failure in people that you look up to? And I know that the person was asking, or I assume that the person was asking based off of being in a work environment or a team environment, somebody you look up to. And I've experienced a ton of failure, and I've experienced a ton of falling up short. And I can give examples of when I've found that in leaders, but the best examples I can give are in myself. I've experienced that more with myself than I have anybody else. It's not about arriving at, because you're not going to be perfect and you can't be perfect. It's about the steps that you constantly take towards improvement. I fall short every day. Sometimes it's how I raise my voice to my kids because they're little sons of bitches and they won't shut up when I want them to. Sometimes it's
truth.
Yeah. So, I try to teach my kids about, financial discipline, and sometimes it's like, oh my God, I have to have that. And I'll go, and like, I make mistakes all the time. All the time I make mistakes, but I just I have no problem going and looking in the mirror and be like, hey, you sucked today. But you know what? I'm gonna do a better job tomorrow. I like being in the valley. I'm not interested in the peak. It's about the valley. And I'll be in there for the rest of my life. And everything that I've talked about, I'm not a master of any of those things. I'm still grinding away with everybody else.